This is the latest edition of Front Up, and we have a great program today. And I have Ericholch here, who has been recently involved with the Coast Guard Museum, and I think you've been quite intimately involved with that. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, it used to be the Life Saving Museum.
Okay.
And that Bob Caldwell started it, years ago, and it was sort of his collection of stuff. And for about 30 years, it was in a 2/3 size replica of the Star of the Sea, the life-saving station out at Surfside.
The one that's used.
So it's not a Coast Guard museum. It's the life-saving.
Oh, it's a life-saving.
It was a life-saving service.
Okay.
Museum, and then they joined forces with Egan Maritime, and I'm the board of Egan Maritime, and they had sort of a building plan that they were working on, and we basically decided to turn this museum, which was sort of like grandmother's attic with just all this great Coast Guard and life-saving service stuff in it, but and the cutter revenue service and all this, revenue cutter service, and turn it into a proper museum. So we hired a gal to look at all of our artifacts, work with Jeremy Slavitz, and create an interpretive story. Because before you walked in and there was all this neat stuff, but you didn't really know how it
I remember
worked.
going in there and it looked like a used.
Yeah, and so now when you walk in, it explains why Nantucket, is situated where it is, and all the shoals, and why all the wrecks used to happen. And then as you go into the shipwreck part of the museum, it highlights 4 shipwrecks, and then you go into the main.
Which shipwrecks does it highlight?
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot. This is I think the Kirkham, the Marshall, Witherspoon, and one other.
Oh, okay, but they're all.
We did all this a few years ago, so I'm getting a little rusty now.
Well, they were all around Nantucket.
They were all Nantucket shipwrecks, and
you wouldn't have the Essex on there because that was.
No, didn't have the Essex. They're all ones that ran aground on the shoals of Nantucket. Mm-hmm. And then as you go through the shipwreck part of the museum, you get into the original part of the museum where they have the lifeboats and the sort of life and duty part of the museum, what it was like to be stationed on Mattucket, doing drills, living there without your family.
They had the station out at Mattucket. I remember at the end of Mattucket Road.
Well, there was the life.
No, that was a Coast Guard station.
Yeah, that was Millie's Coast Guard thing. But the life-saving service had places in, I think, Muskeget, Tuckernuck, Mattucket, Cascada, Surfside, Sankaty.
Right.
So they were all over the island.
And the one at Surfside, is that one of the original ones?
The one at Surfside's it's the last remaining life-saving service station on its original foundation in the country, I think.
Yeah. And it's
These things were all up and down the East Coast.
Yeah. Were these volunteers?
Originally they were volunteers, and then it turned into a paid. I think the life-saving service turned into a paid thing, but originally they were volunteers. So I think those guys had a different name. They might have been called wreckers or something. But when we changed over the museum, we also looked into kind of rebranding it because we weren't sure that Life Saving Museum really captured everything or the excitement of it. And basically they realized that every life-saving event starts with a shipwreck. So we renamed the museum the Shipwreck and Life-Saving Museum.
I think that's more catchy.
It's more catchy, but it also is.
It describes.
Better what happened, because every life-saving event started with a shipwreck. And,
now, if I went out and I got a shipwreck, do I get to keep the spoils, or what happens?
That's a good question. There was a recent thing in the news where this guy had this huge yacht down in Florida, I think, and during a hurricane he washed up onto some shallow areas, and he stayed on his boat for like 2 years because it was a $12 million boat, and if he left the boat, then salvage
Yeah.
You know, if you leave the boat, it becomes
Sure.
a salvage thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know the nuances of maritime law, but there are some
Yeah.
peculiar things where you can lose your boat if you abandon it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so a lot of these things washed right up on the shoals, and some of them washed farther out. I think the one that we did a movie on that's in the museum is the Kirkham, and that's the one where they won. The local group won lots of awards because they rowed out middle of the night. They saved everybody. They rowed back. They were out at sea for like 24 hours, you know, in January, in a gale, rescued everybody. One of the guys from the life-saving service passed away about a month or so after the event, related to the event. But so it's some pretty heroic stuff. I mean, the thing that we always say is that if whaling wasn't the big story on Nantucket, it would probably be the life-saving service. You know, down in Hatteras, it's all about the life-saving service because they don't have the whaling. So it's a big story, and it really hadn't been told well before. And so what we tried to do with the museum is tell the story properly. And it's a gorgeous location.
Yeah, I went out there for your opening the other day, and I was just amazed.
It's so beautiful out there. Yeah. And you know, it's a pretty place to be. And then what's unique about the Life-Saving Museum is that we have docents that actually, you have a choice when you walk in the museum of actually having somebody walk you through the museum and tell you the story. And they're there all the time. I mean, they're not there on the half hour or something. They're just there all the time. And so you don't have to. You could go through it yourself and read the labels. It stands alone. But, you know, we have these folks there that are dedicated and knowledgeable.
Now, do the bus tours stop there? I mean, how do people find out about it? How do people get there?
Well, the bus tours, the bus tours do stop and sort of poke their nose in and
let the people out.
Let the people out and photograph. But I don't think they let them off for half an hour, and come back. And you know, what's nice about the museum is you can really spend an hour and get a really good feel for what was happening. It doesn't have to be a half a day event. I mean, you can do it in an hour. And now we have a special show on Sea Dog. You know, we have one exhibit room that we made in the museum that changes every year. Last year was Matticat Millie.
Yeah, I saw Sea Dog. Now, who was Sea Dog? I mean,
how'd that happen? You know, I can't remember how we got the idea, but there was a wreck called the Wreck of the Marshall, and they saved a dog in that wreck, and it was a big Newfoundland, and it became part of one of the families of the guys in the service. Ended up keeping it because the guy who owned it got shipped out on another boat and he couldn't take his dog. I think that's how the story goes. And
but the people survived also, didn't they?
Yeah, I think most all the people survived as well.
But the dog stayed in Nantucket.
The dog stayed in Nantucket, and so we had a book made, and this year we're coming out with a new book, a hardcover. That's the book we made originally was basically for sort of 2 to 6 year olds, and this book is more, you know, 10 to 12 year olds.
This is the Egan Maritime Institute that's doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really the Life-Saving Museum.
Oh,
that's
okay.
doing
I
it.
see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Bill Burnham, a friend of mine, actually has donated this book. He's in the business, and
that's great.
He donated it. So and then Claire Urban was making a giant, you know, Newfoundland dog chair that I was just out there and sat in. It's this huge chair. It's actually almost scary because it's this giant Newfoundland, and it's cool. So it turns out that Mystic Seaport had a Sea Dog exhibit that they had used a few years ago, a traveling exhibit that Mystic had done. So they were nice enough to let us sort of pick through their exhibit, and most of these life-saving stations had dogs, and a lot of ships had dogs. There were a lot of Newfoundlands on ships. The Coast Guard has a dog called Sinbad. So there's a...
And Millie had dogs.
Millie had lots of dogs. So there's sort of this culture in the life-saving service and the Coast Guard, you know, to have dogs. So we thought it'd be fun. So the exhibit in the Life-Saving Museum, which I just was out there to check it out again, and basically is part of the Mystic Seaport exhibit. And then the exhibit at the Egan Maritime picks up on a lot of Nantucket sea dogs. So the ones at the Coffin School are pictures of Nantucketers out there with their dogs fishing and sailing and whatever. So it's
you've tied the two exhibits together.
We did it. Because usually the two exhibits don't relate to each other. But this year there was so much material for sea dogs that you know, we thought it'd be fun to tie them together. Now,
before we quit, I just want to ask you one other question.
Yeah.
And that is, don't you have a website up that's doing something about the weather?
Yes. A few years ago, Egan Maritime, we had one of these retreats, and we were coming up with ideas that Egan Maritime and you know, the Shipwreck Museum, what could we do to be a service to Nantucket? And the idea came up to have a weather website that was Nantucket-centric. So I found this domain, ACKweather, acweather.com, which I figured was kind of a memorable domain. And we spent the winter putting in, you know, I've been talking to all my sailing buddies and fishing buddies and surfers and getting a compilation of all this data for weather, waves,
and putting together in one place.
All in one place.
Would you recommend
acweather.com?
Would you recommend that a sailor punch into this before they go out, or?
Yeah, we actually have, like, you know, tidal currents all the way down to if you're going to Newport. It gives you the wind forecast, the weather, the dew point, you know, everything. It's pretty complete, and it's sort of Nantucket-centric. That's the acweather.com. ACKweather.com. Yeah, it's a good way. It's an excellent website.
So I gather I'm getting a signal that our director here is saying that we're hitting the
end.
The end. But anyway, it's great, and I'm sorry we didn't have 2 hours to discuss.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. That's fine.
We'll have to bring you back. But
no problem.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Whitey.
And we'll have you on quite soon, and all your friends will come up to you and say, "Hey, you did great."
God, I hope so.